The BBC has been disgraceful with its complicity in the Gaza Holocaust by Israeli terrorists in the last 18 months. Rarely have you seen a member of this now disgraced publicly funded media outlet highlight the war crimes committed by Benjamin Netanyahu and his medieval gang members. That's why the BBC's reporting on the Israeli terrorists' guarded confession in the brutal murder of 15 paramedics came as a surprise today. This was after the Israeli terrorist group, the IDF, claimed that it had dismissed a deputy commander ranked terrorist from its outfit for professional lapses. This terrorist was dismissed not because he brutally slaughtered 15 members of the medical team in the most barbaric manner, but because he buried the ambulance after murdering his innocent victims. The Israeli terror group, the IDF, also repeated its lies once again, claiming that 6 of those killed were Hamas fighters. This is where the BBC's reporting, particularly by its Jerusalem correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, becomes quite significant. Astonished, to be honest, to see this reporter demolish Israeli lies point by point, maybe much to the dislikes of his Zionist bosses or pro-Israeli colleagues within the organization. I wonder what they must be thinking seeing Gary speak the truth for a change on live TV. Anyway, I'm going to play this video where Gary exposes Israeli lies with such calmness.
It did find some failings. It talked about operational misunderstandings, which I think some will find as pretty mild language. It talked about breaches of orders. It talked about a regret at the harm that had come to civilians, uninvolved civilians, by which we assume they mean those members of the medical crews that were killed who they do not believe belong to Hamas, because Israel still says 6 of these people who were killed were Hamas members. They produced no evidence to support that. And the names of all the 14 medical workers and civil defence workers are in the public domain. So they could point to those names and say this person, and this, but they haven't chosen to do that. Now, they've taken some action. They've fired a commander who was on the ground. They've reprimanded a commander further up the food chain. But they've also praised the commander who was on the ground, having fired him, about his service, about his career, about his abilities. So in some ways, they have given with one hand and taken away with the other in terms of him. There are still some big questions, not least this one about the Hamas fighters and whether or not there's any proof of that. They haven't explained why night visibility was a problem, given that we now know these ambulances had their headlights on, had their emergency lights on. That should have made them pretty obvious in these circumstances. And there's been no real explanation about the breach of orders that seemed to lead to the killing of the UN worker in his car. No explanation of why discipline broke down at that particular time in the night, whereas they're asserting that there was no indiscriminate fire 15 minutes, 20 minutes before when the multitude or the mass of the people were killed. So there's a lot of open questions here.
Now, Gary is not the only journalist who has exposed the Israeli narrative. Earlier, Alistair Bunkle had done this with a lot more force and conviction. Alistair's colleague in Sky News, Alex Crawford, carried out an in-depth investigation to conclude that Israelis were lying to hide their war crimes. On the Israeli terrorists' claim to link these paramedics to Hamas, Alex has said this.
The Israeli military has now admitted to shooting the medical workers, all of whom were unarmed, but they have yet to provide any evidence for their claim that Hamas militants were among those killed. Initially, they said 9 of the rescue workers were militants. About a week later, the IDF revised the number of militants down to 6. But again, they haven't yet provided any information about how they knew that Hamas militants had buried themselves and hidden themselves amongst the paramedics. Sky News has also investigated the social media accounts of all the paramedics involved, and none of them show any obvious affiliation with Hamas. So we asked the Israeli government directly about their claims.
Were they
I'm happy to answer.
identified as Hamas, these 6 Hamas you've identified? Were they identified before these troops opened fire or after?
So that's why Hamas themselves use ambulances to hide their identity.
Right.
While
So
our
it was
soldiers,
after. So it was after.
No, while our soldiers stake out Hamas terror squads, Hamas hides behind civilians and then cries foul when terrorists are targeted.
In case you have forgotten, Israeli terrorists had killed 15 paramedics, including members of the United Nations, on 23rd of March. After carrying out their cold-blooded murder, Israeli terrorists buried them under the sand. They also destroyed ambulances and buried them under the sand too. When the news of this unimaginable barbarism by Israeli terrorists came to light, the rogue regime of the settler colony first denied the charge, saying that paramedics were moving without any warning or emergency lights, and then they said that those killed were Hamas fighters. However, days later, a video shot from one of the paramedics' body cams exposed the Israeli lie. The paramedic in question was Rifat Radwan, who was heard reciting the Shahada, the declaration of faith by Muslims in their creator and his messenger, and apologizing to his mom in his final moments. I uploaded that video on our Telegram channel some time back. For obvious reasons, I can't play that here as much as I want. But you can watch that full video by Sky News' Alistair Bunkle on our Telegram channel. The details are there on the screen. The video conclusively proved that every single ambulance was well lit and had its emergency lights flashing. All paramedics were wearing their reflective gear. Clearly, Israeli terrorists simply wanted to kill these paramedics for fun, as they always do in the occupied Palestinian territories. Faced with global shame, the Israeli terror outfit, the IDF, commissioned a sham inquiry, and today they have claimed to sack a member, which means absolutely nothing. This terrorist, who has been supposedly dismissed, had joined the Israeli terror outfit as a reservist after the 7th of October attack. So clearly, his life didn't depend on this job. The fact that no one has been criminally charged for this ghastly crime against humanity shows the kind of inquiry these terrorists carry out in Israel. No wonder the Palestinian Red Crescent has termed the inquiry a joke and instead called for an independent inquiry by the UN, something these terrorists are unlikely to agree to. Now the question is, would the BBC and its outlets such as Radio 5 Live conduct debate shows exposing Israel? These Zionist propagandists masquerading as journalists are often very quick to devote hours of airtime when the victim is an Israeli. Here, these Israelis have slaughtered 15 paramedics in the most barbaric fashion and even confessed to their crimes. And yet, no one, absolutely no one, would call for consequences for these perpetrators. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you do think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.